Thank you so much for coming to this workshop. So it's all based around inclusive design within audio products. We're going to look at the what that means, why that's important, and how to actually do it. So what's coming up apart from that? We're all going to do introductions. We've got an amazing panel here that I can't wait to introduce. So we're going to look at accessibility, what that means, why it's important, and how you can engage with the topic of accessibility. So Tim's going to introduce us to some best practice guidelines. We're then going to have a little break. We've then got two kind of feature spotlights. Firstly, looking into Ableton and how they've really integrated accessibility over the last year or two. And Arcana Instruments, and looking at how they've effectively built a whole company around inclusion and the development of their first instrument, the Arcana Strum. We'll then do Q&A. We're hoping to have at least 30, 40 minutes at the end to just have some really good chats about all this stuff. So just a little heads up, we're not going to delve super deep into code and stuff like that. I think there'll be a point where I'll signpost you to get more of that stuff if you want, but we're not delving that deep into the programming side of things. So we're hoping there'll be quite an interactive session. Obviously, we've got an amazing panel, an amazing room full of people, amazing people online as well. So we're going to use the workshop's Discord channel, and we're going to come to you guys for some suggestions at certain points. So just a little heads up. It'd be great if you could be thinking about what access means to you, why you feel it's important, and any particular products or examples of accessibility that you found really useful or inspiring. We've also got a wireless mic for questions in the room, which we'll come to at the end. So firstly, I'll do an intro. So who am I? I'm a bit of an imposter in that I'm not an audio developer. I'm a producer and a mixing engineer, so I'm a user of these tools that you guys all create. So that's my perspective, really. I'm also partially sighted, so that's why I feel like I'm quite a good bridge for the accessibility stuff. So I also work at RNIB, the Royal National Institute of Blind People, as their music support officer, where we support blind and partially sighted musicians of all ages, whether it's people in education or trying to get into employment, or maybe people who have done music or sound stuff their whole lives, but now they're losing their sight and they need to find different ways of working. I'm also project manager and founder of Sound Without Sight, which is an online community hub for blind and partially sighted musicians. And our kind of mission there is to connect the community of blind and partially sighted musicians with each other, and also with resources, opportunities, and support. And Tim.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Yates. I run the Research Innovation Programme at a charity called Drake Music. So just a bit about Drake Music. We're a national organisation. We've been going for about 30 years, working at the intersection of music, tech, and disability. Believing that everyone has the right to express themselves creatively through music. I know everybody here already knows how important music is to everybody, but it's such a fundamental thing. Everybody should be able to do it. We're particularly focused on using new tech as a way of opening up access, and with a view to making the world a place where disabled and non-disabled people are making music as equals. The social model of disability, which Elizabeth is going to talk about later, is a really fundamental part of what we do. And so that's really the underpinning of all of our work. The kind of work that we do lots of different kinds of work in lots of different areas. We work with disabled musicians, we commission work, we have residencies, we do have a career development program. We also run workshops and outreach programs and all sorts of different kind of activities along those lines. Generally focused on using kind of the latest accessible tech and technology to facilitate that, and then we try and share that knowledge more widely. We advocate to improve access across the board. We offer training in social model and in accessible tech and those kinds of things as well. And the final area that we work in is research innovation, which is the bit that I'm responsible for. And that is really to do, you could switch, there we go. So we do a lot of accessible instrument design. Co-design is the main way that we approach this, and so we're often building bespoke instruments with individual musicians to meet their particular access needs. So that's a big part of our work, and we've been doing that for a long time. We've developed lots of different kinds of instruments in different contexts. We do things like we run hackathons. The most important thing about that is that we kind of bring different groups of people with different expertise together to solve some of these problems. We run outreach programs and grassroots programs. DM Lab is there, and we also try and bring together lots of the different people who have capacity to make changes in this area together to really facilitate changes and make the kind of structural changes that need to happen to improve the situation. And finally, and our big overarching project is the Accessible Musical Instrument Collection, where we're trying to bring together all of the resources, accessible music tech, all of the instruments, all of the software, and all the expertise into one place, which will be a hub for musicians and everybody working in this area to really go and start to concentrate the knowledge to enable us to make some big strides forward, which are currently really difficult. So that's the kind of main focus of our work.
Thanks, Tim. And Elizabeth.
Thank you. I feel like I need to put on a presenter voice. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. Elizabeth J. Birch is my full name. I'm a music artist, vocalist, producer, songwriter, and tech enthusiast, which basically is a fancy way of saying I have no idea how technology is designed, which is what I'm hopefully going to learn over the next 3 days. But I absolutely love using technology, and I use a lot of unnecessary technology within a very complicated live setup because I find it makes more sense. It's weird. Anyway, but I'm also a music facilitator and an advocate. I focus a lot around inclusion, music technology, songwriting. I really like challenging what music is, how it's made, who musicians are. And I, in general, want to just challenge the music industry in how it's set up and what that means for its creators. And that's me.
Thanks, Liz. And Tim.
I'm Tim Burgess. I'm a one-man band. IT consultant, specialising in accessibility, particularly music tech, and lately, more particularly, hardware accessibility. Okay.
Thanks so much, Tim. And Andre.
I'm Andre Louis, and I am an Ableton mover and groover, especially lately. I delve in areas of Logic teacher and training, so I train blind people how to use Logic Pro, and I think I'm going to start a little workshop on how to teach people to use Ableton Move and enjoy themselves out in the wilderness, because it's nice when you can leave most of your tech behind, except a drum pad, well, a 32-pad joyful box of noise. What else? I'm a musician, I'm a producer, composer. I work in all sorts of different fields, including R&B, jazz, and even drum and bass.
Thanks so much, Andre. And AD.
Hello. Is this on? Hello. There we go. Thank you. So I am AD Dickens, and I am the leader of accessibility at Ableton. And so a little bit about me is that I got into accessibility in music hardware and software when I did my PhD in accessible digital musical instruments. It's a mouthful, I know. I have a very long thesis and probably 4 people have read it, but that's fine. So I work at a company called Ableton. And for those of you who might be in this room and don't know Ableton, we make music hardware and software products that are mainly used in the electronic music kind of sector, but are, very powerful tools to all musicians in all areas. And we focus a lot in live performance tools as well. Why are we here on this panel is because accessibility has been kind of a main focus for us in the last 4 years even. It's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of people who've always mentioned that Ableton was not the most accessible with its products. And we heard that, we recognized it, and we tried to do better. And actually, in the last 2 years, we've seen the launch of Live 12, which is the first accessible version of Live 12, which is our digital audio workstation. And we had the release of Note, which is an app on iOS that is also accessible to VoiceOver. And we've also had the release this year of the Move, so Ableton Move, and that is accessible to a screen reader. We haven't been all singing or dancing about that, and I'll cover that later, because we're still working on some of the challenges. And I'm here today to talk to you about those challenges and hopefully inform you on, if you're planning to go down the path of accessibility, what you can do as developers, as a company, to really make it work for you and to make some progress there.
Brilliant. Thanks, AD. And finally, we've got an online panelist joining us, Haim Kairy. Haim, are you there?
Hi. I'm going to learn this relating app. And as I anyway, I'm a co-founder of Arcana. technologist, musician, and great fortune and luck to be involved in this, what started as a hackathon and turned it into, I think, my dream job of fusing together music technology, and entrepreneurship and social impact. So I don't know what I did in life, but either it's something really bad, this is the only way I can fix the karma, or else great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Haim. So, Elizabeth, you're going to lead us through the next section, right?
Yes, and I'm going to be a little bit of a bad guy, and now you have to socially interact with each other. So the question is, what do we mean by accessibility? So I want you to turn to the person next to you. Ideally, if you can turn to someone that you haven't spoken to today, that would be amazing. But I'm aware that that's quite intimidating. So if you could just turn to somebody and have a discussion with them about what accessibility means. It could be a definition, it could be an example, whatever. If you're online, maybe pop some stuff in the chat, in the Zoom chat or on the Discord, and then we'll have a look at what everyone's answers are. Go. I hope that everybody had a good chat with each other and had some good ideas. We have a couple things on the Discord. Easy to use for all was one thing that came across. Breaking down and lower the barrier to entry for anyone to create and play. I really like that. Accessibility is making equal space and opportunity for everyone to create stuff, break stuff, and have fun in the process. I like that as well. Break stuff. I enjoy breaking stuff.
Like that.
Do we have anything on? Do we have anything on the Zoom at all?
Nothing on the Zoom so far.
Okay. What about the room? Does anybody feel like sharing what was being discussed? Go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to share a point from my compatriot here, Chris. I'm going to say what he said to me was very interesting. So that actually, I think accessibility is something for a very particular section of the community.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look deeply into it, it's actually something that serves everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, now you're just stealing part of my section. That's not fair. Okay, well, hopefully that's just given you kind of a little bit of an idea of thinking about accessibility, what it could mean and how it applies to things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the social model of disability today. Has anyone heard of the social model of disability? Yeah, a few people. So up next is a definition, which I'm going to read out. So the social model of disability is the understanding that disability is something that is created by society. Disability isn't something that exists inside your body or your mind. It's something that is created by an inaccessible society. So when we look at the social model of disability, this is in comparison to the medical model of disability, which we are going to look at in a minute. But when we come to the social model, we're looking at barriers that are outside of the person. It's changing the focus from outside the person to society. Barriers can be physical, for example, not having a ramp to access a building. They can be social or attitudinal barriers, so that's like stereotyped beliefs or disabled people can't do something, for example. And when we talk about disability, we're not saying that it diminishes the challenges of an impairment or a condition, just the fact that the disability is removing it from it being the person is the problem to society being the problem, which is hopefully what this next picture is going to get across. I'm sorry that it's a bit blurry. It's not, this is the only one I could find. But I'm just going to explain what it is. We have a woman in a wheelchair in the middle who is sitting at the bottom of the stairs where there's a sign that says, "Weigh in, everyone welcome." On the left, we have a speech bubble, which says the medical model of disability. Her impairment is the problem. They should cure her or give her prosthetics. And then on the right side, we have the stairs are the problem. They should build a ramp, which is the social model of disability. So it's removing the focus from the person being the problem and the person that needs to be, quote unquote, fixed, to society's the problem, or their barrier is the problem outside of the person. So I'm going to pass on to Jay to talk a little bit about some definitions and also who this might affect.
Yeah, so not to dwell too much on the kind of medical model side of things, but if we just think who might be excluded from using your products, it's basically anyone who's not been included in the design or the testing of that product, right? This might not necessarily be people with disabilities. It might be people who, speak a different language. It might be people who maybe after a while of using a product, then they notice they're getting eye strain or something like that. But I guess specifically we're thinking about people with disabilities. So it might be people with sensory impairments, so people who are blind, partially sighted, deaf, hard of hearing, people with physical disabilities, so limb differences or motor differences, and also neurodivergent people. And I think it's really important to recognise as well that disabilities can and very often do intersect. So someone may well be sensory impaired and physically impaired or neurodivergent. So just a couple of useful definitions at this point, just to bring it back to audio a little bit. So when we're thinking about accessibility, I guess the question you want to be asking throughout development is it possible for everyone to use all the features of my product? And hand in hand with accessibility goes usability. So is the user experience efficient and equitable for different user groups? So I guess it's one thing for something to be technically accessible, but is it really accessible if it takes 10 times as long with a screen reader, for example? And I guess inclusive design, I'm going to define that as the process of asking those questions throughout development right from the start and empowering potential users to help you answer those questions. Okay, back to you, Liz.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to be the bad guy again, or the good guy, because it looked like it was going really well the first time round. So I want you to get back into chatting again, get back on the chat on Discord or on Zoom. And I want you to talk about the big why. Why should we design inclusively? What is the point? Why? Go. I also just want to say, feel free to, if you have any questions at any point or something comes up in your discussion that you want to talk about later with us, either pop it in the Zoom chat or on the Discord, or just keep a note of it for later on when we have a Q&A. So some things on Discord, create equal opportunity for all and avoid systematic exclusion. There are some very good words there. If you're designing inclusively, nobody gets excluded or left behind. From a social perspective, it's making a product the best it can be. So thank you so much for the Discord. Is there anything on Zoom at all?
Q&A. Nothing so far.
Okay, what about the room? Does anyone have anything that they fancy sharing?
No, now is the correct time to share about educated design. Maybe that's later.
Say again?
Now is the correct time to share about educated design. Maybe that's later.
What's happening later?
Yeah, no. I think that is a really good point, Trey. Actually, do we have a volunteer to take the radio mic to Trey? That's... the radio mic's just here.
Sorry. Hi everyone. So I'm Trey Culver. I'm a software accessibility consultant, software tester, and also a musician. And I just wanted to make a quick point that right now in development, the common paradigm is what do these bunch of users want, and we'll give them this, and then other users who don't want so much, we put them as lower priority. But in music software, and quite often in a lot of the software that you guys are making, because it's audio software, there'll be a lot of different people using it for lots of different things. And what you find is, if you take a piece of software and you say, okay, what's the most edge case and the most niche thing that someone's going to use the software for? Let's make that accessible. By the time you've made this edge case accessible a few months down the line, you have covered a lot of other accessibility software areas. And it's not a strategy that we're seeing in development right now, but I think it could be a beneficial one, because you want to make as much of your product accessible as possible, and edge cases will cover lots of different areas that might not be covered otherwise, but in that coverage, it will make lots of common bits of the software accessible as well. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Trey. Is there any other... There's another hand up over here. And then I saw that there was one over there as well.
Hi. So something that came up in our conversation was that when you make something accessible, it can actually make it also more useful for able people. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment for the first time ever. I used Siri while I was driving to send a text to my girlfriend because I was going to be late. And I was like, wow. I've been putting this off, and now thinking in terms of like even music production software, how much smoother could the process be if I could just describe what I wanted rather than diving into menus. And so it's like there are benefits that aren't, that there are wider benefits, basically, is I think that we came up with.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Do we have time for just one last one? Because there was a hand up over here.
Hi. I would say very simply that when you make your product accessible, you reach more people and you have a bigger market share. And so you get more feedback from more different people. And so it's like a virtual circle. So, yeah.
All of you have been reading my slides, I see. Thanks for that. No, I'm joking. No, those are all brilliant. And I think it's really important that we keep asking why, because why is what gives us our mission and why is what keeps us going on the path. For example, why do we need stairs in the first place? It's because we want to get to multiple stories, right? Why do we put the filter after the oscillator? It's because that's how the signal flow works. If we can answer why, then we can more accurately put it into practice. So let's have a look at why accessibility is important. Some of this has already been covered. The first one is that diversity is important. Jay, could you just share that stat for us? And then
So there's a couple of little stats on this side. I might as well just do them both while I'm on mic. So at RNIB, we actually did a piece of research last year where it was 1,000 general population music fans, and we asked them, is diversity important in the kind of range of artists that you hear on the radio, you see on TV, that get promoted on streaming platforms, all those kinds of things. And it was great to see that 7 in 10 recognised that is really important. I guess the other side of that, the other side of the coin, is that we also asked, can you think of any current blind or partially sighted musicians who you see in those places or you hear in those places? And only about 3% of people could. So back to you, Liv.
So hopefully those stats kind of give a little bit of context to what we're talking about. But I find diversity is really important, particularly when it comes to representation and the people that you're going to be impacting. For example, someone seeing a piece of technology that they can use and feel comfortable using might encourage somebody to do audio development or some sort of audio career in the future. And that might encourage somebody else, and that might encourage somebody else. So we're not just thinking about the now, we're thinking about generations into the future. But also, there's a severe lack of, just as you said, there's a severe lack of representation of disabled artists in the music industry. And when I say give a voice to the voiceless on here, I'm talking about music as a form of communication, because I've often heard that music is a universal language. And that must mean that if it's a universal language, everyone can speak it, right? But if it's an exclusive club, the chances are it might stay that way. And we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak that universal language. So the next thing is about inclusion encourages innovation. As soon as you're asking yourself, how can I make this more accessible to everybody? You're immediately thinking outside of the box. You're immediately even maybe creating something that no one's ever thought of before. And, we've got to think in a legacy mindset, which I'll come back to later. And I just wanted to add really quickly about when inclusion's done right, you don't notice it. And this sounds really strange, but I always think of inclusion as the baseline. And inclusion can feel like a very thankless job, right? It can feel like you're doing something and no one's saying thank you, even though I've been really inclusive. That's not the point of inclusion. The point of inclusion is that is the baseline. People notice when they are excluded. You don't want people to notice that they're included because that's the baseline. Does that make sense? We don't want it to be gimmicky. We don't want it to be tokenistic. We're like, look how inclusive we're being with this technology. It's all about having people genuinely included as opposed to tokenistically included. So I just want to go over a little bit more stats for you about the potential user base, the people who could be using accessible technology. So the first one is, and this is a crazy statistic, I was kind of shocked, but 23% of working age adults are disabled. That's nearly 25%. That's nearly a quarter of working adults. And I was just blown away. And then the second one blew me away as well. Globally, more than 2.5 billion people need one or more assistive products. That's globally. So there's just a massive amount of people who need something that's slightly assistive or adaptive or in some way accessible. And it's worth noting that employers and educational institutes now have a responsibility to purchase inclusively designed tools. It's now a legal requirement to make reasonable adjustments. And one thing to say from my own experience is that customers are loyal to companies who recognize their requirements. So for example, I'm an Ableton user, and I know that Ableton are really good. I'm not just saying that because you're here. And I know that Ableton are really good at responding to what the needs of their user base are, what the needs of artists are. And that's why I've stuck with Ableton, because I know that they'll work with me as opposed to working against me. And lastly, and this is probably a big one, is designing inclusively is actually cheaper in the long run, because you don't have to go back and kind of redo something. You don't have to go, oh, now we have to make an adjustment here and spend more money on the advertising campaign. You could just do it all from the get-go, which kind of leads me into the next point of why we should design inclusively. And the first thing I should say is start as you mean to go. And that's what I kind of mean. If you start inclusively and you start accessibly at the design process, it's going to be so much easier in the long run, because you don't have to do any of the faff that might be required later. If somebody goes, oh, this isn't working for me, or I can't access this, you don't have to then go, great, now I have to dig back into the code. I have to dig back into the hardware. And it's worth saying that throughout the process, we should be involving disabled users, because they are the experts of their own user experience. And we're very eager. Are we all eager to get involved, crew?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
I'm glad one person is. And it's really common that we're not asked. And I think it's really important that you ask the people who are going to benefit from what you're doing. And that means that you need a diverse range of voices, not just disabled people, but loads of people from all walks of life. And then I want to go on to the legacy mindset that I was talking about earlier, about looking forward. You want your product and you want the technology to stand the test of time for 10, 20, 30 years. And the last thing you want is, you know what, I'm going to say it because it's funny and I feel like you're a warm crowd. I always say, don't be a blackberry. Does everyone remember blackberries? That means yes. Because they refuse to be innovative. They refuse to kind of be accessible for everybody to an extent. And you don't want to be someone that's going to become obsolete in the future. You want to be somebody that can withstand the test of time. And then the last thing I just want to talk about before I hand over to Tim is that inclusive and universal design, as very beautifully put, was by, I don't know his name, but he's gone now, no. Is that it benefits everybody. It doesn't just benefit disabled people, it benefits everyone. Everyone has access needs, even you have access needs. Have a think right now about, don't have to talk about it, no more social interaction, it's fine. But just have a think about what are your own access needs? What do you find frustrating? Maybe you find it really frustrating that you have to dive through that menu just to get to this one setting. Or maybe you find it frustrating that, you know, you can't figure out how to save this preset even though I've spent hours on it. You know, these are the kinds of things that are to do with access. And I think that as soon as we start asking ourselves, how can we make something that more accessible for everybody or as many people as possible, we're actually being innovative and we're benefiting the wider population. I'm going to pass over to Tim. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Elizabeth. That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of the way that we think about access at Drake Music. It's a broad area, and it's more than just solving a technical problem. There's a lot of different areas that you need to think about in access to really make something truly accessible, which means that all of the people who need the thing and want to use the thing have it and can use it. Okay, so we have our 5 A's of accessibility. And we start off, obviously, with the thing that has to be accessible in the first place. And that's not always very easy to define. Something that's accessible for one person is not necessarily accessible for another person. But there are some fundamental principles, and Jay's going to talk a bit more about those later, that it's really easy to make your stuff inaccessible. And so there's a kind of baseline of stuff that you really need to get right to make sure that basic level of accessibility is there. And then beyond that, I think it's as Elizabeth said, it's about talking to your user group. It's about, working within your particular context of what you're making, finding out what the people who use your stuff need, and also, making sure they're included in the design process in the beginning. Really, a lot of the time, options are what's important. A certain knob may be perfect for one person, totally inaccessible to another person, but can you make it that someone can switch the knobs over? that kind of stuff is really, really a kind of useful thing to be able to include, and to understand that you can never make the ultimate accessible thing, but to understand that the more options you can give people, the better that is, and the more people are going to be able to use the thing that you're making. And so when you're talking about making something accessible, that's part of the thought process that I think is really important. And the corollary to that is that it needs to be authentic, by which I mean it is co-designed. You include those people in the design process. It is something that genuinely meets the needs of the user group. There are many, many examples out there of things that have been designed as accessible instruments or with accessible features where that consultation and that inclusion was not part of the design process, and they turn out to not be useful at all. And that's really just a terrible waste of effort and time and energy, and really it can be incredibly frustrating. So authenticity, including everybody in that design process, is really essential. The third and a really important thing is affordability. Accessibility equipment and accessibility kit can be extraordinarily expensive. It really can. There's an enormous tax that gets placed on things. Often it's for good reasons, small production runs and things like that. But just the affordability of stuff is a massive barrier to entry to people. And especially when you're talking about music tech can be very expensive. And so one of the things that it's important to do is to make sure that if somebody is investing in your expensive piece of kit, your expensive piece of software, that they know that it is or isn't going to work for them before they invest in it. And that's something that doesn't always happen. So it's really important that you share information about what your stuff does, how it works, who it's going to be useful for, who it might not be useful for, those kinds of things, and share that information so that people aren't forced to make expensive purchases or don't make a purchase and are therefore excluded because they're not able to find that information out. And similarly, availability is important. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do at Dre Music is bespoke, and so we develop an instrument for an individual musician, and we maybe make one, or maybe we make three, or we make a small number. And so there's always a big challenge about scalability with that. How do we take that thing and make it available to all the people out there who could use it? And that's very much for us an unsolved problem. But I think availability is also about knowledge. If somebody doesn't know that something exists, then they can't have it. And the information often isn't available about accessible instruments and accessible features in equipment and software. And so making it available to people means telling everybody about it, making sure that everybody knows, making sure that everybody can understand. And if somebody needs something or has a particular access requirement, they know that your thing does what they need to do. And so that's absolutely essential to make sure that the people have what they need. And finally, adaptable. As many options as you can provide them, because people's access requirements change over time, even from day to day. People, maybe one day somebody will use eye gaze to access a piece of software because they've lost a strength in their hand, and then the next day their hand is feeling stronger and they would use a fader or something like that. That happens all the time. And so the more options that you can give people so that they can use the same piece of software, the same piece of hardware, the same rig, and it can flex and work with them to work with their particular requirements at the particular moment in time, that really makes a massive difference. So I think as with everything, really, options are the thing that really make the biggest difference. And the more different ways in, the more different approaches that you can offer people, the better that is, and the more likely you are to meet people's access needs. People will work very, very hard to use stuff, and they will put a lot of time and effort and energy into doing it. And the more that you can ease that process, the better it is, all around, basically. So that's a kind of overview. I've done these before, but these are really perennial things that crop up all the time. Accessibility. So I'm hoping that the other people on the panel will add to this list actually after I've gone through these. But so these are kind of top 5 things that crop up for us in terms of hardware and software. First one, I think Elizabeth's already slightly referred to this, is are your accessibility settings themselves accessible? Have you buried it 5 things down in your menu system on the 5th tab? That happens a lot more often than you might think. And somebody needs something to be accessible from the moment they start using it. They can't use it and then figure out how to use it and then find the accessibility settings and make them work. It has to go from the very beginning. So is there a way that you can do that? The onboarding process, can you put it right at the very front, whatever that is, to make sure that from the very first experience somebody has with what you're with your thing, that access is there, and that if they need to change it or tweak it, it's right at the top. It's at the top of the menu system. It's right there, easy to use, so that is in itself accessible. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about your experience with that?
Yeah, I kind of liken it to a video game. Do we have any gamers in the room? Yeah. Have you ever played a game where there's a cutscene, there's no subtitles on it, and there's no menu for you to put subtitles on it, and you have to wait till the cutscene's over? I have audio processing difficulties, so I'm reading it and I'm going, I don't know what's going on. And I have to wait until the tutorial's over before I can even go into the menu. It's a very similar thing. I don't like menus because I have a gripe with them. Does anyone else on here? I assume that there's a lot of gripes with menus on the panel.
Oh yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's more or less a universal thing, isn't it? In terms of it's. Is it 4 clicks too many? Is it 2 clicks too many? How can you reduce that? How can you make that easier? Because, many people access things in all sorts of different ways. Maybe somebody uses their nose to access something on a touch screen or something like that. Every extra click is incredibly expensive for that person in terms of their workflow and what they're trying to do. So the more you can reduce that, the better it is. And I think a lot of this kind of thing goes along with having the design and accessibility at the beginning of the design process. So often what happens is it's added on as a bolt-on at the end, and so it goes at the bottom of the menu at the end of the menu system, and that's how it ends. That's how it's put in there in the first place, and that's how it ends up, and that's how it stays. So that's really important. Second tip: stick to standards. Does your software hardware use the spacebar for play? Don't change it. Don't change the really obvious things, because people are often relying on things like, key press readers or something like that. If your thing works differently in those fundamental ways to the way everything else works, it can actually break it completely. It can break someone's system, and then it makes it not usable. So in the kind of main fundamental functionality of what you're doing, just stick to doing it always the way that you kind of it's expected to be done, because if it doesn't, it can be really a massive barrier for people. And it happens, more often than you might think. Jay, I know you wanted to add a corollary to that in terms of flexibility as well.
I mean, not to confuse the message, but also don't be afraid to question the status quo. I think a good example is MIDI input or any kind of input device, really. For so long, the only way to kind of do music stuff was using a keyboard, using the kind of piano layout, that kind of traditional way of entering notes. It's just not accessible to some people. So just also have in the back of your mind, is this standard way the most accessible way?
Options.
Be inquisitive.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that in the panel?
On the standards side?
Yeah, standards, yeah.
Shall I talk about the taxonomy right now or later?
Let's do that a bit later. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll do that a bit later. Yeah.
Standards also do apply in software and hardware from the actual official bodies of standards. So things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. If you aren't sure how you should implement something to make it the most accessible it should be, you can refer to those guidelines. They might not speak specifically to the thing that you're making, but you can at least kind of learn what they're trying to set, whether it's the minimum contrast or sizing of targets or something, and you can kind of try and replicate that in what you're developing.
Great. Fab. So the third thing is transportable settings. Often people have complex rigs and particular ways that they need to work, and it can be incredibly limiting if you can't move that way of working into another context. So you've got your home studio set up and it's working really well for you, but if you go into a commercial studio, all of a sudden nothing works in the way that you need it to work. And what that means is that it means that you're really limited in terms of kind of professionally and artistically and creatively where you can go with your music. And so the more that you can make it that you can carry those with you. People can carry those with them. You walk into any studio, you know that you can just download, that you can just upload your settings, your rig, the way that you do things, and automatically it will work. The more that can be enabled, the more flexibility people have, because it is incredibly frustrating when you know that you can do it at home and you've got it working brilliantly, but you step into a studio and suddenly nothing works anymore, and there's no realistic way to make it work. So that's the kind of thing I think is really a tractable problem. And so if we can kind of, if that can be kept in mind all the way through, how can we make the transition from one place to another place as easy as possible in all the context? And that makes a big difference, I think, and it's a barrier that a lot of people face. Did you want to add? No. Okay, good.
I think Andre had
Andre, great.
one.
I have a real world use for this, Tim, that you point out. I was at Lipper Sixth Form recently, and I was teaching one of their students how to use Logic, for example. They had a big mixing desk there, and they were using the standard Logic key map. So you had things like Option C to color a track. Now, she and I both can't see, so we've repurposed a lot of these keys into a new key map for VI specifically. So it was just a simple matter of getting the key map onto a USB stick and putting it on the machine so that she, because I was training her, could take the training that she knew to a completely different setup and record the drums she wanted to record. So if I hadn't been able to do that, we'd basically both be learning on the job, which is inconvenient at best.
Yeah. Exactly, that kind of thing. It happens all the time. So the more that those paths can be greased, the better it is. And I also, again, for everybody, that everybody has their own setup. The more we can make that transportable, the better it is. The next thing is multi-press. So anytime a piece of functionality relies on pressing more than one thing at the same time, this is generally very inaccessible to lots of different people in lots of different contexts. And it is something that's very, very common in hardware and software. And obviously not necessarily something that's particularly easy to resolve, because, it's often there's more functions than there are buttons, and, somehow that has to be resolved. But if you can offer ways around that and options for people, the better that is. I have a friend, Steve Arden, who we work with, who's actually developing a thing called the Portable Index Finger or 2, which is a mechanical solenoid-powered switch that he magnetically attaches to his hardware that he can operate with his foot, so that he can do the 2 clicks at the same time in order to move through the functionality. I mean, it's incredibly heavy lifting. He's been trying to do this for a long time. It's hard to do, and it's the kind of thing that it feels really should be achievable. It's a tractable problem. Can you make your shift button latching or something like that? Can you put a port on it? Can you make it MIDI accessible to MIDI so that it can be done with a foot switch or some other physical interface? Those kinds of things really make a big difference. And often the multipress is something like switching from play mode to record mode or something, or switching from some really large portion of functionality of a hardware to another really large portion of functionality of a hardware. And that really can render massive chunks of something completely inaccessible to somebody, particularly in maybe performance contexts and things like that. So the more that can be avoided, or the more workarounds can be provided for those kinds of things, then it really can make a big difference, and it can really make a difference between something being almost unusable to being completely usable. So that's a big one. So that's my number 4. Anybody have anything to add to that? No? And that also applies also to screen-based things. People use pointers, people use their noses to control these things. Multi-press is really difficult in all contexts and lots of different ways, so the more you can avoid it, the better that is. The final of my tips is don't remove access features, especially without telling people. It happens more often than you might think that somebody has a rig, a really bespoke rig for them, for the way that they want to work. It works brilliantly, and the next, version 1.34 will come out of the software, and the thing that they rely on vanishes, and it's just gone. And it can. When I've met people where you can end up on ancient hardware with ancient operating systems locked into this really old, unusable kit where nothing else syncs anymore and nothing really works because you're dependent on this 1 or 2 really important key bits of access that you absolutely depend on. And it really can be a massive problem. So if if perhaps there's a reason, but at least communicate if you're changing your feature set or you're tweaking something, or what might seem like a small alteration can actually be the very thing that makes something really work or not work for somebody. So it's really important that if you're going to make changes, you communicate with the user group, make sure that everybody knows, and ideally just avoid doing it and keep those kinds of things as consistent as you can possibly can over time, so that somebody knows if they're going to invest 100 hours in figuring out how to make this piece of kit and this piece of software work for them, they're not 6 months later going to discover that actually it's scuppered, all of their work was wasted, and they have to move on and find a new thing. It does happen. It happens more often than you might think, so that it's a really kind of central thing to bear in mind as you progress through, as you're making things. So that's my kind of top 5. I was wondering if anybody has any others.
I have something just to add to that last one is the removing of access features actually sometimes just happens because of other softwares or other OS updates, or something breaks something along the chain. And there is a huge temptation when that happens to you for your thing to go into, well, whose fault is it? And pointing the finger. And if somebody comes to you and says, hey, all my stuff is broken, I'm a performing artist, I need it back up and running in 24 hours. Like, spending time trying to figure out the answer to that question, unless it's helping you find also the solution, being like, how did this happen? Oh my God, I can't believe this. And spending time trying to blame other people isn't going to help you or help that person. So literally, if that happens, have some humility, say, right, okay, we recognize that, we understand you, we hear you, let's dive into doing something to fix this for you. Because the more time we spend going, because we are going to question, but we did a really good job and we thought we were doing really well. You can't control what you can't control. So just recognize in that moment there's a time to take pause and say, how can we fix it? And not ask any of the other questions if you can help it.
Fab. Thanks, Heidi. Has anybody got any other things that they'd like to add to the list? Things that are really good, things that are often problematic.
I have a. Do you want? You go first.
Okay. You were talking about standards. The various OS manufacturers do have standard documents about their accessibility features. So make yourself familiar with those. And you might find that you don't have to work as hard as you might think in order to achieve your goals.
I forgot what I was going to say. Hang on.
Sorry.
No. It's not your fault. I have a very oddly specific one. I don't like it when between versions things move drastically. And I don't know whether it's an autism thing, whether I'm like, but the play button is supposed to be there. Now I can't use it, because it's moved 2 inches to the right. I'm kidding. But yeah, when things drastically move between versions, which similarly to like what you're saying about removing access features, I find that quite frustrating and overwhelming. I also think that's what I was going to say. Like learnability is really important when it comes to tech. And I think that applies for everybody. But, I think it applies even more for certain reasons, because sometimes people will put things under you have to learn it. And that's why you can't do it. You have to learn it, you have to learn it. And I just don't think that that's always an excuse. The learnability should also be accessible just as much as the actual use of it is.
Cool. Well, I've got a few more bits just, I guess, framed around plugins and software instruments and stuff like that. Is it useful for me to go through that?
Yes, why don't you go
and
through
then
that
we'll
now?
get everyone else's views. Just a few examples of design considerations for user interfaces. Firstly, how might users access my software? They might be using a screen reader and keyboard navigation. So Andre, you're going to do a great demo on this later, so I won't dwell on this too much, but a screen reader is something that will describe what's happening on your screen and what's under your cursor at the current time. A low vision user might use magnification. I'm zooming in on stuff all the time. People might use hardware controllers like we've heard, MIDI or a Stream Deck, something like that. People might use eye tracking or head tracking. And like Tim says, some people might rely on using a touchscreen as well. So what implications might these things have for UI design? Again, we've kind of touched on some of these. I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but just to kind of put some ideas out there, kind of yeah, we'll just do these very quickly. So clicks are really expensive. Minimize clicks. Clearly label all the elements that are in your UI. That means kind of at a structural level, so a screen reader knows what's going on and what each element is. And also ideally visually with text as well, so that if you've got a smart screen reader that can recognize text on the screen, it will be able to pick that up. Similarly, group related elements together. It seems obvious, but actually it doesn't happen a whole lot. So on the right, I've got an example of the Valhalla delay, which I love pretty much all of Valhalla's UIs. For me, as a low vision user, they're just great, so clear, and they do this very well. So that's things like if you've got a delay, okay, have the time bits of delay, well, the bits of the kind of the main components together, and then the filter as a separate kind of grouped unit. And this, like I say, that really helps screen readers as well, as long as you structure stuff in the right way. If you design a plugin using Juice, it does offer a really good starting point for screen reader accessibility. And I think if you want to learn more about that, you should definitely check out Harry Morley's talk from ADC last year, which is on YouTube, where he spends 40 minutes going into how to design an accessible Juice app with all the code and stuff. So that's great. So just a few more little bits. AD's mentioned briefly the web accessibility content guidelines. So just a few themes from there. Make sure there's good contrast between the things that people need to click or read and the background. Seems obvious, but again, you see so many examples where that's not been considered. Avoid any really small UI elements that people need to click. Again, seems obvious, but there are a lot of examples where that's not the case. And someone who doesn't have super fine motor movement, or someone who relies on using a touchscreen, or anyone really, might find those elements difficult to kind of pick out and click. Similar to that, make sure there's some space around your elements. They're not kind of one next to each other, so you can't accidentally click one rather than the other. Scalable UIs can be really useful for some people, as long as they're not just to kind of overcome deficiencies in the points above. Yeah, some people really like to be able to scale UIs. I mean, I normally work just by zooming in on my Mac, but yeah, some people seem to think that scalable UIs are really, really important. Automation parameters are quite a big one. I think the main message is just to make sure they're named in a useful and intuitive way, so that if someone is accessing your plugin primarily using automation or parameters inside of the DAW, they know what they're adjusting, basically. And related to that, make sure that the scales are meaningful, so they're not just going from 0 to 127. If it's a delay time, make sure you're reporting the time in seconds or milliseconds and things like that. And a couple of things that are kind of related to screen reader access, but also useful for anyone really. I think if you can, avoid forcing users to have to click into blank space on a plugin. Sometimes you see this when you need to load like another component or another part of an instrument or something like that when you're making your own preset. Screen readers find it really difficult to pick up blank space as opposed to a button that says add something. And you do still see that sometimes. And related to that, avoid forcing users to click and drag. So this might be to reorder components or to change a rotary control or something like that. Yeah, always give people an alternative method as well, rather than just forcing people to click and drag as the only option. So yeah, those were just a few bits and bobs. And I think buzzword that I've heard a few times already this conference is skeuomorphic UI. And I have been asked in the past, is it bad to design something as a kind of realistic replication of a piece of hardware, as opposed to doing a kind of flat design, which maybe opens up more opportunities to present stuff in a different way? And I guess it depends really on the hardware that you're emulating. Like, look at the faceplate of the thing, and is it laid out in a useful way? Are things grouped? Are things bold? Is the contrast good? So it's not necessarily that skeuomorphic UIs are bad or worse. It really depends what you're emulating. And if you've got a little bit of license to be slightly creative, it's always good to adapt the faceplate of something to be a more accessible interface for anyone, really. And that's not really just an accessibility thing. It's just, good design. So, yeah, principles and guidelines from anyone else. So this could be the panel, or it could be in the room. Any pieces of hardware that you think has been really good, or software, or any things that really help you to access stuff that we've not already mentioned?
I was just going to mention quickly, Goodhert's suite of plugins, I think, address this knob issue. In that they specifically avoid trying to emulate knobs from analog interfaces, specifically because they're actually really annoying to use with a mouse or a touchpad. So I guess it's one of those examples where it probably didn't come specifically from an accessibility perspective. They just thought, this is really annoying to use in modern day interfaces, so let's address it. So I'd say they're a really good example of interfaces there. So Wolf compressor, that delay plugin I can remember the name of. Basically anything by Goodhertz, I would say, really good example.
Awesome, thanks so much.
There was somebody at the back as well.
Yeah, just to add to that before we hand over.
Okay, sorry.
That is a thing with hardware as well, is that we've always changing aesthetics, is from going from notched things to sweeping and every time somebody changes it has a real impact for accessibility. And actually the really old school, very heavily notched analog controllers offer some of the best usability because you can really know where you're at with each of those things. So, sometimes looking cool isn't as important as being usable. So
awesome. Probably got time for one more.
Yeah, there's one more comment at the back, I think. Yeah.
I also just put this in Discord, but like one thing I haven't seen, because I see a lot of stuff, it's like, oh yeah, like make contrast really high, blah, blah, blah. But then I feel like one thing that I feel like is really missing a lot of the time is the ability to actually go the other way. And I always feel like I often have this like very hacky way of having to like get around that I can't just like reduce the contrast of something when I feel like I can't look at a screen. There's like a ton of contrast at certain times.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess that's, again, about giving people options. I'm not a developer. I don't know how difficult it would be to have several different kind of skins for your plugin. But I mean, that's something that the Valhalla ones do. For example, you go to a different mode and it displays different colors. I know the Song Athletic stuff that's just come out, you can load your own background into the plugin. So it doesn't seem beyond the realms of possibility that you give people the option to set their own colors and stuff. Okay, going to hand back to you, Tim.
Yes, great. Okay, so I was just going to do a quick, we're quite short on time, so I'll do a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I think. But just a quick overview of a few things where access has been added or kind of access has been an important focus. So perhaps should we go, let's pop to the Focusrite. So the first thing is that Focusrite have now introduced screen reader accessibility into their 4th gen interfaces, which is absolutely brilliant. It's tied from the hardware into the software, so the entire thing is screen readable, which is just a really fantastic progress on this. And that, I know Focusrite have really focused heavily on access and making sure that their stuff works well. But this, in particular, one of the most important things is that Focusrite stuff is everywhere. And that really, really matters. It really matters that you can walk into any school, any studio, anywhere you go, and there is accessible kit that will work, that is there for you, and that it's well and thoughtfully designed and carefully designed, as this is. The more that this is just standard, the more that this is an ordinary experience, the better it is, because it's not just necessarily about somebody being able to make music. It's also about somebody being able to forge a career and a professional path into the music industry, and so it has to step beyond their rig, their setup, out into everywhere that everybody goes. And so having this kind of hardware available with this kind of access, these kinds of access features is great. It's on everything. It's on all the models, which is really important. Often accessible kit is premium and it's added as a kind of expensive add-on, or it's up in a kind of premium range. This is on everything. So, from the home studio all the way through, it's there. They put it on their front page of the product page. They put the access features there, which is really important. Really important. So everybody knows it's there. Anybody's looking for an interface who needs a screen reader, they can find it on the front page. Everybody's talking about it. It's part of the standard offer to the world. Which I think is really important. So the other thing is clear documentation. Often, great access features are added and stuff is done, but nobody people aren't told about it. There's no information about it, and so in many ways, it might as well not be there for many people because they don't know that it's there and they don't know what does and doesn't work. And the interesting thing about this is it tells you what's there, but it also tells you what isn't there. So if you need a piece of functionality and this particular piece of hardware or software doesn't offer it, you know that, and you know that you need to look elsewhere. So having a really detailed list of the access features, where they apply, where they don't apply, what is and isn't there, is a really important thing, and they've done that really well here, I think. The next thing is Zoom Essential Recorders, which now have screen reading functionality built into the hardware. Now, handheld recorders are notoriously inaccessible because they tend to be small, they tend to have tiny buttons, they've got loads of menu diving to make them work and those kinds of things. So it's really very, very exciting that Zoom have put this into this hardware, and that it's across the entire range. And again, Zoom Kit, these things are everywhere. Everywhere you go, these things are there. So it becomes standard, it becomes expected, and that's really, really important. So the other thing is the accessibility features are the fourth thing on the product page. It's right there. It's as a kind of fundamental feature. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an add-on, it's a fundamental feature that's just there in amongst all of the other features. That's really important as well. Finally, the next thing I wanted to feature is an instrument called the Digit Composer. And this is a relatively new instrument. It's an explicitly accessible instrument, originally modeled on wheelchair motor controllers. But they're trying to take this in the other direction. They're taking this as an accessible instrument and taking it out beyond accessibility so that it becomes a standard piece of kit that comes from that place. So it's got access built in absolutely from the beginning. That's its kind of original fundamental purpose. But they are aiming and trying to take it beyond that so that we're bringing access out into the rest of the world. And so it's there, and it's incredibly flexible. It's got an app that supports it. It does all of the, you can use it in lots of different kinds of ways. So I think that's a really exciting bit of kit. There are a bunch of other things I was going to talk about. I feel like we're out of time for that, Joe. What do you think?
We can do a very quick.
I do a quick.
I think they're cool things, but yeah. Just do.
So I just want to give you so these are the kinds of things that are out there being developed explicitly as accessible instruments. There's a kind of range of different kinds of things. So I thought it would be valuable to share them. The Clarion is an instrument it's been developed for a long time by Open Up Music, which is a Bristol-based charity. It's an eye gaze instrument, and they use it particularly. They run open orchestras and accessible ensembles, and part of what they're doing that makes this. I mean, it's intrinsically a great thing, but also they're very focused on repertoire and supporting teaching materials and things that go along with the instrument, which is a really important part of new instruments and new accessible instrument design. The one-handed clarinet is an amazing thing developed by a amazing wind instrument maker called Peter Worrell. It's a fully functional clarinet that you can play with just one hand, which is amazing, except that they cost $6,000 and he can make about 2 a year. So whilst it is in many ways accessible, it isn't affordable and it isn't available. And so it's a wonderful thing, but trying to solve those kinds of problems, this is a really good example of trying to address those kinds of issues, where they're trying to develop a 3D printable version of this so that it doesn't cost $6,000 anymore, and it's more, you don't need to be a world-class expert in making wind instruments in order to make it. So that's an example of that category. Haptic baton is an instrument. So this is more of a kind of infrastructure type instrument. It can be very difficult for blind musicians to work in orchestral context because they can't see the conductor, and so they can't follow the conductor. This is a haptic conducting baton. So it takes the gesture of the conductor's movements and gives haptic feedback from a haptic device on somebody's leg or arm so that they can then perform in an orchestral context. It's really important, obviously, to ensure everybody has the options that they need. Kellycaster is a Drake Music project for John Kelly, who's a bit of a legend. It's an accessible guitar that was bespoke, made for him, but is something that he's been using for 10 years and is his professional instrument. He uses it, he tours the world, he plays all over the place. So what this shows, I think, is that it's a really tractable problem. This is a really good example of a really strong, accessible instrument that supports the musician to be a professional musician at the highest level, touring wherever he wants to tour. And this is really the goal for accessible instruments. I think these kinds of things need to be out there much more widely. Finally, Mimu gloves. I'm sure you will come across these one way or another. But Mimu realised very early on in their development process that this had potential accessibility uses. And so from very early stages, Chris Halpin is the musician there, worked with us and got early prototypes before it was a commercial product, was using it in an access context, and now, Mimu gloves still continue to be, incredibly useful in that context, and it's been really important. I think that they've had that as part of their development process from the very beginning. So I just wanted to, share that. And I think then we've got crikey. Really run out of time to talk about these things.
Well, some of these themes will come up in the Q&A at the end,
that's
I'm
true.
sure.
Yes, okay. So perhaps we'll leave those for later.
We'll park those for now.
Yeah.
So that's it for our first part of the session. So Tim's contact details are on the screen there. So Tim Yates at drakemusic.org. I did actually mean to put Liz's on there as well.
How dare you?
Liz, what's your email?
My email is very easy to remember. It's just elizabeth@elizabethjbirch.com. I'd love to chat to people about tech because I'm a nerd.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. We're going to take a 10-minute break now while we get set up for the 2 spotlight sessions. So see you in 10.
So for this part of the session, I'm actually going to be taking the lead on the mic. So I am AD and I lead accessibility at Ableton. And I would like to just kind of take you through what we have done at Ableton to kind of focus in on accessibility and also give space to it in the future. And I recognize that we've done a lot of talking today, so we're actually going to do a bit of live demo as well. We've got the wonderful Andre Louis here with the Move, and we're lots of love. And we're going to show you how that works with a screen reader, and maybe we'll make something good. Hey,
Hope so.
Yeah, we hope so. So, what are we going to cover today? I'm going to look at Ableton's accessibility journey from when we started to how we got here. I'm going to give you a quick overview of that journey for our products. So Live 12, Note, where we're at with Push and Move. Then I'm going to do the demonstration here with Andre, and then we'll come back around to talk about our learnings and also the future for accessibility at Ableton. So our journey actually started in November 2020, which maybe not many of you will know, because this was kind of behind the operational side. We were doing work as consultants externally to Ableton. So myself, Andre, Tim, and a few others were external consultants working on initial research where we interviewed 23 music makers from the visually impaired and blind community. And we took these 2-hour-long research sessions and kind of tried to understand the barriers and the problems as much as we could. In November 2022, which was after we'd been working away on this problem for some time, we knew that accessibility for screen readers was going to be scheduled into a release for Live. I joined the team to work on this and to continue work on this as the accessibility specialist, and also to look at how we could extend this for our other products and services. So after that, in December 2022, I took on the next project, which was auditing and improving the voiceover experience for Note. And we formed a weekly test group of 4 visually impaired and blind music makers, which include Trehan here, who's at the front, lovely, and Tim and Andre. And we started doing weekly sessions of testing and feedback. In May 2023, the private beta started for the Live 12 screen reader accessibility, and we ran onboarding sessions for 10 weeks to introduce the test group to Live 12 with one of our certified trainers, Chris Pratt. And then we had the first accessible release just before this in April for Note. So Note became voiceover accessible from December to April, so 5 months from 0 to being fairly much there. In October, Note actually reached its first milestone, which was taking it to saying, okay, we think we've covered all of the bases now for voiceover accessibility. We're going to move into the process of maintaining it. And so that's a big change in a point where you can really say, we think it's almost there. Obviously, accessibility is never 100% because everything changes. It's a continual process. It's like any coding process. You just have to keep going, and you'll find bugs all the time, and you'll be doing tests all the time. And as soon as you release a new feature, you break something else. It's just part of the course of things. And then we reached also in October the code fix for Live 12, and we turned our focus to bug reporting and the documentation. So we start to host weekly office hours with our test group, which was now around 30 users, I think. Then when the public beta was announced in November of 2023, we actually made the decision to engage with as many visually impaired and blind music makers as we could. So it was approximately 100 people that we took into this cohort to begin with and started testing and doing all our standard QA processes with to bring us up to this point. And then in March 2024, this year, we released Live 12, and that became the first accessible release. In April, I turned my focus to the next scheduled release, which was Move. So we started doing the audit of Ableton Move with Andre on board. So we had a couple of pre-production units that we could actually get in the hands of Andre and myself, and we were remotely testing them between London and Berlin. Then in July, we started planning for integrating our Live 12 test groups, our different communities, into just our standard QA processes so that they could have input in every other channel as well as this kind of exclusive cohort for only screen reader users. And we started looking at how we're going to do accessibility processes in the future as we prepare for the next live release. And then in October, just last month, we had the Ableton Move release. And so we now have an accessible piece of hardware out there, as well as the Live 12 software and the iOS app. And this is kind of the journey that we've come to. So for Live 12, the process was really starting with those interviews with 23 music makers. Then it fell into the private beta, which I said was around 30 to 50, I think we had. And we had this really intensive onboarding program so that people could actually do that part that was mentioned earlier by Elizabeth about the learning something, the taking away the burden of having to learn this on their own and then say, go give us feedback on the accessibility features. We were like, no, we had paid a trainer to prepare these sessions. They had learned how to use VoiceOver and I think also Narrator on Windows to do cross-platform support for these people as they took them through a 10-week journey of learning live and actually using it and getting to a point where then they could give us feedback that was actually, oh no, I'm using this in my daily routine and this is a problem for me, rather than, oh, I'm just trying to learn something and it could be me because I don't really know it, and not feeling like the burden was on them. In September, we started the weekly office hours, which meant that we just had drop-in sessions. People could bring their problems. We could, if we had a feature that we were particularly interested in discussing, we could take that to the group and mail out and say, does anybody want to join us? We're going to talk about this today. And sometimes we would just all end up chatting rather than actually really chatting about live. But it was really worthwhile because the chatting led us to talk about experiences, and the experiences still inform things and choices that we'd make with accessibility. And then in November, we had the public beta. We get more feedback from a further 70 visually impaired and blind music makers. And then in March 2024, we had the Live 12 release. Now, April 2024, not to forget this big important part, is we then started work with Tim Burgess, who's been here with us today, on the documentation about learning to use live with a screen reader and knowing that that's a really big and important part of the process, and auditing all of the help and knowledge-based documents that we had and the parts in the manual as well. So what does this really lead to? Well, the achievements is that we have an accessible version of Live now. Thankfully, it took us long enough, but we're there. We have one. We have new keyboard workflows that have been added to Live, which means you can use Live now without a mouse, which is something that lots of people have been requesting for a very long time, not just anybody in the disability community, but it means you can stay on your machine, not take your hands off the keyboard, and just be creating. We've had amazing, overwhelmingly positive feedback from our research group. And that has been fantastic and kept us going throughout this process. When it's been hard, we've had an email come in to say, this is the best thing ever. I'm so excited and I can now do this. And that really, really helps. We also had a really great feature about the accessibility in Computer Music Magazine, and that was entitled Ableton's Accessibility Revolution. Now, in my job, that felt really good to have that title come up. And we're now one of the first companies in the industry actually to engage with this amount of testers, this size of a community in doing accessibility in the development process. And the community reactions have shown us that this was a really good way of approaching accessibility. We had feedback that came in from all different channels, email lists, and also through our QA processes and through Reddit. And I read all the places where we had feedback, and this is just 3 comments from the top of it. So, Ableton really thought about everything. Great attention to detail. Thanks for all your work on accessibility. Live is my go-to door at this point. I can't express how happy I am to finally see the accessibility support in Ableton Live. As a legally blind professional museum, the lack of this kind of support created a love-hate relationship with Ableton Live for me. Better late than never. Ableton has recently started taking accessibility very seriously, and it shows. Nearly everything is usable, from the plugin interfaces to MIDI and audio editing. So that goes to show, like, when you spend time in these processes and really engage with the community in this kind of really positive, and you're really listening, this is the kind of feedback you get from the community, and it really, really helps. As I say, it's helped some of our developers on their worst days and being really frustrated with a problem that we couldn't fix, knowing that somebody was on the other side, just really appreciating the work that they've done. So for Note, it was actually a much quicker story for us because it's not such an expansive program. It doesn't have a legacy code base. We were getting to accessibility just after release. So it was early on in the journey for us to be able to tackle most of the problems. So in December 2022, we invited 3 visually impaired and blind music makers to audit the Note app. This was Tim Burgess, Andre Louis, and Treyhan Culver, who are all here today, so you can talk to them about their experiences. And in April, we were able to go from the developers being like, this isn't going to be accessible at all. We're not sure about you getting testers involved. I was like, don't worry about it. We will find the problems, we will deal. And in April, we actually had the first release on the App Store that was supporting voiceover. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And it had a lot of the features accessible to voiceover. In October, just 6 months from there, we actually made Note the first accessible product available to the public that we could say was 95% there, and we were now moving into maintenance mode. So here, the achievements were that in 5 months, we went from 0 to functional with VoiceOver. In 10 months, we went from 0 to 95% accessible with VoiceOver. And it was recently reviewed on Apple Viz, which is a website that does a lot of reviews for the blind community about products and services and what is and isn't accessible. It was reviewed as probably one of the most accessible music production apps on iOS aside from GarageBand, which is built by Apple, who build the platform that it's being used on. So obviously it's going to be easier for them to tackle some of the workarounds if they're also the hardware and the software developers. So yeah, that was really, really, again, heartwarming to get that kind of review. The community reactions here were, I just got this app and I'm really, really impressed. One of the most accessible, fun pieces of creative music software right now. Then we move on to Push. Push is a much bigger story because it is hardware that we've been working on for, I think, over a decade now. And we had Push 1, Push 2, now Push 3 being released. And it takes a lot more to look at that product and understand where the barriers are. So really what we've started doing since December last year is doing the audit on this and understanding where are the big barriers. And our goals for the project is to identify any of the immediate showstoppers for accessibility. What will mean that this a person could never use this on stage or trust that they could use this. Then establish the improvements that can happen through firmware updates. So understanding just what are the restrictions that we have from the previous choices in our hardware and software. And then we will take that paired with understanding the showstoppers to see if there are any small changes we could make to improve accessibility going forward. So, and then we're going to start looking at what are future design considerations for updates. If we release another version, what are we going to look at for changing maybe some of the hardware aspects or maybe some of the firmware aspects? What choices would we make differently if we start over? And now we're on to Move, which is another piece of hardware, but because we were able to start with the Move team at an earlier stage, there weren't so many limitations. There's just some of the hardware limitations, which we'll talk about when we demo. But the process was very similar. It was start an accessibility audit. And that's when we got some Move devices in December of last year, and me and Andre started working together on auditing. We reported the first outcomes of the first pass in February, and in April, we started working with reporting to the development team what the required updates were to get us to a better point in accessibility. And our goals here were to assess the screen reader UX of Move paired with a Move manager, to identify any of the accessibility improvements for onboarding materials and documentation, and to create documentation that would support onboarding and the use of Move by members in the visually impaired and blind community. So far, the community reactions have actually been pretty good. Even if the Move isn't for you, I think we all have to give a big shout out to Ableton for making the Move accessible to totally blind users. Kudos to the dev team for putting the Able in Ableton. It's another great piece of accessible tech. It's great that another piece of accessible tech is now available. And one of my favorites. That's awesome. Do you know if they, Ableton, developed it to be accessible like this on purpose? I hope so. But it's nice that it became so ubiquitous in the machine itself that they were like, that's really cool that it also does this. Like, it wasn't an add-on to them that was a feature that was required later. So now I'll see, how long do we have left of this part?
We could do it like a 10-minute demo.
Okay, so I'm going to set a 10-minute timer on my phone. And me and Mr. Louis here,
against the clock.
we're going to see what we can create in 10 minutes, okay? So do you just want to remind everybody what it is that you do, Andre?
Hello, I am, all right, timer's active. I'm a move maker, yeah? Well and truly, because this device is one of those things that I fell in love with straight away, right? Ableton isn't paying me to say that. I'm saying this because, and Tim B will definitely vouch for this. I told him in no uncertain terms, I hate hardware.
Sorry, Andre. VoiceOver is going to pipe up in a second, just so you're aware. There we go.
Transpose 0 sec. Hold 1.00 moose.
Yay.
Conga high smack. You are currently on a main.
So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a window that has a visual camera over the top of the Move device. So this is the new hardware device that we have. It is portable and usable everywhere, and you can choose to use it offline, or you can connect it to the Wi-Fi, or you can connect it to other Moves. It has a lot of flexibility in it. And you're also seeing a page on the Move Manager, which is our screen reader page. So somebody would connect their Move to a Wi-Fi, connect their machine or phone or whatever they want to use the Move Manager on, also to the same Wi-Fi, and then you get this constant feed on the screen reader page of what you're touching, what you're handling, and everything that you're doing on there. Go away, Andrew.
And this works with Braille as well. So if you're not a speech user, then this works with Braille. I tested it with a Braille display as well.
Awesome.
So because it's just, plain text on the screen, it's not talking directly to the screen reader as some things do. So there's the benefit of this. Now, I'm going to do a thing. And it's hearable, I think, out there. I have this conga pattern, but I don't really want it, so I'm going to get rid of it.
Clip deleted.
Clip deleted. Right, so let's go find us a kit.
Perk Spirit Kit. Perk Spirit Kit. Back 1 of 10.
So just to
Olympic
explain
kit.
here,
Menu
when
item 2 of 10.
Move starts up with a new set, and you go into a new set, you get given 4 instruments that are just randomized. Every time you start a new set, 4 different instruments on 4 tracks. And so we'll go into each one and we'll create something. Maybe a drum beat is first then, Andre.
Yeah.
So the level of the Move is there if you'd like to.
Yeah, we'll use this kit. It'll do. So what I can do...
Kit.
is make sure that I'm not in record mode, and I'm just going to play something now, and that means when I've done playing, I can press the capture button. So I'm going to pick a tempo.
Captured 53.5 BPM. Menu item 1 of 2.
And now see, it's 55.
Metronome on.
But
Shuffle.
I don't like how it did that at all. So I'm going to redo it. And this is the fun thing, you can make something happen however you want it to happen.
Clip deleted.
So here's our tempo. Let's speed it up a little bit. Here we go. So this time, instead of capturing the way that I did, I'll actually hit record and play a beat this way. There's so many different ways of getting the idea down. There's nothing wrong with either way.
Back to those options.
That will do. So now I can hit the old quantize key, which is quite useful in this situation.
Clip 100% quantized. Battery 60. Wi-Fi Marriott Congo again. Quantize. Counting on. Next step grid 1/32. Submenu 2 of 4.
So here the quantize is actually set wrong. It's set to 1/32. It should be 16ths. So because I was playing slightly ahead of the beat, I'm gonna
step grid 1/16. Menu item 2 of 6. Step grid kick shuffle.
And you see the screen reader has announced everything I've done.
Clip 100% quantized. Kick shuffle.
See, that's really cool now. So we have a nice beat here. But there's a load of sounds here that I may not want to keep. So I thought we could do a little bit of audience participation and have a live thing going on. So I'm going to hit this sample button here. And what I'm going to do is give you a countdown, 3, 2, 1. And I want everybody to either, we'll do 2. We'll do 1 clap and 1 hey, all right? So the first one will be a clap. So after 3, we're going to have everybody clap in the room. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Let's see if it...
6.
That's you guys. And now I can use that in my track by doing this. Sick.
Clip overdone. Clip 100%
All right.
quantized.
And this one, we're going to make the hey, because I don't really want that sample there. It's a stick click, all right? So again, 3, 2, 1.
Hey!
Nice.
Set 1 wet 7.
So it's a bit...
Transpose 0 saint. Transpose 0 saint.
There we go. So basically, I just set the start point of the sample. And it's a little bit clipped. So there we go. Let's bring it in like this. Yeah.
Clip 100%.
There we go. So let's move on to
reverb send.
The reverb send here.
Reverb pad 2 INFDB. Reverb pad 2 0. Reverb send.
So the way that Move works, you've got all these different pages. And so the first page is the name of the kit. The second page is the pad that you touch, in this case, the hey, which is just labeled with the set number and name. The third page is effect 1, which is independent for each pad. And the last one is saturator, but it can be changed, of course. And that's global across every pad on the kit. So let's send the claps also to the reverb slightly as well.
Reverb pad format, reverb send.
All right, let's listen back. That's so fun.
Right.
All right, so that's track 1 done.
Electric bass chop.
So now let's move on to track 2, and track 2 is always a bass. This electric bass chop, I don't really want that.
Electric bass chop. Esperim's a bass. Menu item 22 of FM choke bass. Menu item 24
Yeah,
of
have a bit of
57.
FM going on here.
FM choke bass.
Now, I don't want to work in C major, for example. Let's change this key.
Full velocity on. FM choke bass.
Where's my key?
Repeat. Full velocity in P.
There it is.
Menu item
Yeah.
C submenu 2 of 3. C
Right.
menu item FG. G menu item A menu GA. A menu item 10 of 12.
There we go. So we've got A.
A submenu major, minor.
There
Menu
we go.
item 2 of
Okay,
FM choke bass.
I also have full velocity on now, which means I don't have to play the pads anywhere near as hard. So
Octave down.
drop down an octave here, and
FM choke bass.
let's try a thing. Our repeats on. Let's get rid of
Hard
that.
repeat off.
There we go.
FM choke bass.
What we're going to do. Yeah.
Clip 100% quantized.
So imagine that we want to change some of these parameters. We've
FM
got
choke bass.
8 parameters along the top, and if I just tap across each of these capacitive controls, it will tell us what is what.
Filter cutoff 115 Hz. Filter reso 78%. FM amount 32%. Mod amount 100%. Attack 1.00 ms. Time 10%. OSC2 gain minus 3.6 dB. Sub gain minus 3.1 dB.
So let's play with the
FM choke filter cutoff one filter
Filter cutoff.
filter cutoff
2 minutes.
23.4 Hz.
All right,
FM
so
choke bass.
that's enough. We'll just turn the filter down.
Filter cut FM
Right.
choke Angelina.
I need a quick new sound,
Angelina.
really
Portum
fast.
Brister. Menu item 6 of 5 Portum Brister.
Okay,
Unison
We're doing
release
this.
1.31 Hz.
We're gonna
Release-
make
Release
something.
7 Portum Brister.
let's go.
Clip 100 to start the solo.
So you can have, so yeah. All good, all good. I'm not even going to record into that last track. I'm going to leave it there. That's my solo track. My party trick.
We'll do something later. Or maybe somebody could join us after this session if you want to mess around with us.
Yes, come mess
and
around.
we can add something to it.
Hope you enjoy that little demonstration of Ableton Move.
Again, another big hand for Andre Louis. And switch back to my presentation.
Yes.
Just so you know, that was 100% improvised.
Yes.
And I'm now wondering if I have to fire
Was it
Andre as a
rock?
consultant because I just can't work with somebody this damn talented. It hurts. But yes, so we're just going to carry on, and I'm going to give you like our lessons learned, and then also just some things that we're going to look at in the future. And I will be quick, I promise. So, 1, involve the community. There's the time, Andre. You were
In the
time. Yeah. Okay. Involve the community as soon as possible. When you are building something, it can feel like a really big thing to hand this off to somebody when you feel it's not ready. Believe me, it was ready the moment you entered one line of code. You could have something that is completely inaccessible. Handing it over will help you to focus where the real problems are. When we do it ourselves without the lived experience, what we often do is assume a lot and assume where the important barriers are. We don't actually know. So it's best to just get somebody on it, even if it's one person. Maybe you don't have the ability to engage with a big community. Just get one person with the lived experience for the accessibility problem that you're trying to focus on and ask them, take a look at this for me, will you? Wander through it, play it, see how it feels. Tell me what's wrong, please. Schedule regular meetings with your testers. I would not have been able to do what I can do in terms of informing our devs and keeping on everybody's coattails on, have we done this yet? Have we got this fixed? If I wasn't having weekly meetings with our testers, being reminded of, yeah, that thing still isn't fixed. And, sometimes your developers won't be able to reach those problems as quickly as you're having meetings. But as long as you're constantly being reminded about the things that are bothering people the most, then that's a constant reminder for you. Be present and be honest about the capacity for changes. A lot of what me and Andre have been working on the move, we haven't actually been able to get round to doing any of our fixes yet, have we? Because the schedule towards release became so heavy that there just wasn't chance before the code fixes, before all of the hardware shipping. There are logistical problems that get in the way. Be honest about them. Be like, well, we can't change it right now, but we're going to schedule it in this sprint. We're going to do it next time. We're going to do it then. And don't just say, yeah, we're looking into it. That's not helpful to anybody. Give people a time schedule. Admit your faults. Know where you've missed the mark and say, we know about this. We listen to what you're saying and we hear you and we understand. It's not a bad thing to be bad at accessibility. It's a bad thing to be bad at accessibility and not doing anything about it. Start your documentation early. Me and Tim have learnt this the hard way because unfortunately I've had to take a lot of time off work recently. And this has meant that the documentation work that we've been doing has been kind of ebbing and flowing. And I really wish that we'd been doing this as we were doing all the testing. But the capacity of a team of one, which is me, is kind of hard when you're working through all the different things you need for an accessible release. So know that the earlier you start with this, the easier that pressure becomes. And you can really get that thing released on time with the release. But it's about a week away, eh, Tim? Yeah. Confidence, I love it. Choose progress over perfection. Please don't think that it has to be perfect. We didn't have a perfect version of anything. We still don't. We're still working. We're still listening. It's the same for any other project. You know, it's not just development cycles that always go. Accessibility isn't a feature. It's a foundational thing that you always have to assess. Try your best to not isolate your communities from each other. Sometimes it might be really important to have a dedicated feedback group over in this corner because you need to hear about a specific problem. But the longer you keep them from your main audience's QA process or anything like that, the harder it is to reintegrate these communities and make sure that everybody's heard and everybody's respected in the same ways and that everybody's talking about the same problems. And it also makes accessibility as a thing that you care about very visible to everybody in your community. I think that's really important. After you've released, do an audit through a voluntary product accessibility template. This is called a VPAT in the accessibility world, and it results in an accessibility conformance report. You evaluate against all of the known standards for accessibility out there. And once you've done this, this actually has produced for me a list of the next things for our development for live, because I've gone through it and I've read where we don't support a standard, or if we only partially support, and now I have a story to write for a development team that says, we don't do this, we need to do this to meet standards. And that's really, really helpful, and it shows the importance of it too. If you have the ability to dedicate a team to accessibility, please do it. In the beginning of Live 12, there was a team working on the screen reader API and the screen reader support. And now that we've reached release, we're in a different place where this has to become like everybody does accessibility. And that's a big change and a big shift. But having that team initially in the beginning development stages was the whole reason that we got so far with it, because we had a dedicated team. And beware, when you have multiple points of feedback, you're going to create big gaps in communication. We have an accessibility@ableton.com email. We have an Ableton Access mailing list, which is actually not owned by us, it's owned by the community. And we also have our Center Code QA platform, and then there's tons of feedback that comes in on other social platforms that we just don't have the ability to check all these places all of the time. And sometimes that means people can go waiting for weeks before they get the response. And if you are one of the people that's been waiting for weeks for me to get back to you, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to keep my head into all these places, but just appreciate that that builds stress on you as well. So what's the future for accessibility at Ableton? Well, in Live, we're going to make accessibility everyone's responsibility while avoiding the trap of it becoming no one's responsibility, right? That's the big thing when you widen it to your teams. We're going to be updating our QA and testing processes with the community. We are integrating those groups more now and trying to get that done. And we're working on documentation and guidance. For Note, we'll be doing the voluntary product accessibility template. We'll be trying to grow that community of testers that we currently have. We'll be auditing any new feature that's released back in weekly meetings, and we'll be changing the schedule for testers for more regular feedback based on the release schedule. For Push, we're going to be doing the voluntary product accessibility template to understand the full scope of barriers to accessibility for Push. Also, we'll do the full accessibility audit, and then we'll ask the community about the updates that would be the most helpful at this point in time. For Move, again, voluntary product accessibility template, and then we'll research and design for the initial startup process before accessing the Move Manager. So this is the point where both me and Andre can speak to this. It was it's very difficult sometimes to get this actually connected to the Move Manager when you're traveling, when you're moving, because there's no spoken feedback from the device. And we knew that this wasn't a possibility based on the technical choices. And so we knew that we would have this limitation and we're going to have to figure out a fix for it. We couldn't do it before the release because of the scheduling up to that point, at the point that I became involved in the project. But we're committed to making this the next big challenge that we focus on, and hopefully having some kind of firmware update or hardware update that we can do to make that possible. And we want to introduce more testers to review the release product from multiple viewpoints. For all future releases, we'll be testing as soon as there's a minimal viable product, MVP. We're trying to be more accessibility aware during the research, prototyping, and developing stages. And I will be delivering some accessibility training inside of Ableton to help our developers just understand and recognize the accessibility issues that they might create at an early stage. And for the rest of Ableton, we are going to obviously be looking at web accessibility, because if you aren't aware, there is an initiative in the European Accessibility Act of 2025 requirements, where by July, anybody that's selling to people in Europe, they have to be accessible on their website. And so that means you have to meet accessibility standards, and that is a hard requirement by July of 2025, which means you are liable from July of 2025 if you do not do these things. That's a big, big change, and it's something everybody should know about and think about and try and do something about. And then we'll be focusing on multiple access requirements beyond assistive technology support. So the biggest barrier that we knew Ableton had for accessibility was that if you were a blind or visually impaired user, screen reader access was just not there. If you opened it before the Live 12 update, you would just see Ableton Live, blank window, right? Or
Yeah.
Ableton Live.
It wouldn't do anything.
It just did nothing. And that was a great shame. So we focused in on that area because it was the biggest area that we could do something about. And now we'll start looking into other aspects of accessibility, other barriers for all different kinds of people that we can really work on. And that will be happening through our community development. Where can you learn more? The Ableton Access list is Ableton Access plus subscribe at groups.io to join the list. The Live 12 manual has a whole section on the accessibility changes and FAQ. The knowledge base for help.ableton.com has a ton of FAQ for accessibility changes. And also in our community, there are so many people who have done YouTube videos and other things for the accessibility features. So if you search on YouTube, for instance, for Ableton, product name, and accessibility, you will come across some of our great creators that have put stuff out there as they've been learning, as they've been dealing. And I just want to say from myself and Andre, thank you so much. You can reach us at accessibility@ableton.com.
I'm going to quickly shamelessly plug my own Move accessibility video.
Oh, yeah, you should.
That was mentioned by Peter Kern, magazine royalty. So yeah, if you want to know more about how the screen reader works, and I made a longer beat and I also show all 32 of the sets I had on Move at the time on that video. Again, you can search Ableton Move accessibility, you'll find it on YouTube, and it's there for the taking.
Does that mean you've done 32 more since making that video?
I've done many more.
Andre is always creating with this thing now, and I'm just so glad that we could make that happen.
I can actually use it blind now, and I don't mean pun intended. I mean because I know that because the device does ship with a screen reader adjacent kind of idea. It means now that I know it well enough, I can do everything without it.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for your time. That was super, super interesting. I'm just going to move us on now because of time. Sorry. No, thank you so much. That was an awesome, awesome session. So, Haim, we're going to move on to your session now. I'm going to bring you in afterwards for Q&A and just play your presentation straight off, just so we're keeping things moving, if that's okay.
This is Gil. In early childhood, she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, which is a neurological disorder caused by restricted oxygen necessary for proper brain development during a complication in birth. In Gil's case, it greatly affected her motor skills and muscle tone. She has very limited movements in her hands and fingers. On the cognitive side, she's a very smart girl, above average for children her age. At 13, she wanted to learn music just like her classmates, who at the time were learning to play piano, guitar, flute, and drums. Gil couldn't play these instruments and had to resort to simplified musical toys and percussions. But Gil loves music and wasn't ready to give up on her dream to play. Luckily for her, she found Boaz, a music teacher, that recognized her musical potential. Boaz noticed that Gil's control over her motorized wheelchair was very accurate. So with a joystick and a few buttons, she's totally mobile independent. So he started looking for an instrument that Gil would be able to control based on something like a joystick. And after months of searching online and in stores for an instrument, he found a device that converts gaming joystick movements into a handful of MIDI notes. Gil and Boaz started meeting regularly to play, but after a few sessions, Gil was frustrated by the limitation of the range of notes and her lack of ability to physically recall positions of the joystick to generate intended notes. So it was a fun musical experience improvising, but it wasn't an instrument that she could learn to play songs and improve her musical skills. A friend introduced me to Boaz to try to create an instrument for Gil. Boaz told me about Gil, and I was deeply moved by the story, and we immediately started working on creating prototypes. We created many prototypes until we got to a model that Gil was able to control and feel comfortable with. And after a few months of practicing with the prototype, Gil fulfilled her dream to perform with her classmates on stage. I'm sure you can hear the guitar there in the background. This event was a pivotal moment for us. We saw what an impact it made on Gil, her parents, her family, her teachers and classmates. So we decided to put more resources and time in creating a music instrument that everyone can play. We started researching what solutions were already created out there for people with disabilities. Looking for instruments that were easy to play, but most of them lacked the accessibility that we were looking for. Either they had many small buttons or required advanced motor skills. We studied what kind of controls and buttons people with disabilities were using in their daily lives, different kinds of assistive technology, and we were inspired by all of these. One morning I saw this crane operator from my office and immediately went down to take a picture of his controls, his control pad there, to see what kind of buttons he was using. So we were taking everything in. We created custom buttons and handles and all kinds of controls that would enable us to create a kind of a test instrument. We went out to test these instruments in different environments, in schools, daycare centers, elderly homes. We worked with people ages 5 to 95, learned about a variety of disabilities and what was preventing them from playing music. We started working on industrial design and mock-ups of a model that we would incorporate all the knowledge we collected through the research to create an instrument for further beta testing. The idea was to create an instrument that one hand would strum strings and the other hand would select chords with a combination of finger presses. We wanted to make the instrument adaptable and versatile, that can be adjusted and configured for a wide variety of abilities. Our first working prototype was made out of wood, and the prototype was a research instrument with many features, with a display, faders, and buttons to give us access to different configurations and settings. Working with wood turned out to be challenging for manufacturing, so we moved to a 3D printed prototype that we manufactured a few of these to help us expand our research and work simultaneously in different beta sites. We decided on a final feature set and design of our first model to be released. When you're working with hardware, you really have to commit to tooling and design, and you have to say no to many features that you wished would be incorporated in the instrument, but you got to take that decision. And we started manufacturing small batches in our studio, and also formalizing the company, creating manuals, filing patents, raising capital, and fulfilling orders to first customers, and even working on the packaging. And you got the packaging just right when your cat decides to sleep in it. Here's a video of our first released commercial product, demonstrating the accessibility features used in different use cases. And here's a description of some of the accessibility features that we incorporated in the Arcana Strum. We designed the instrument, the width of the instrument to fit between the handles of a standard wheelchair, so people can play with the instrument on their lap. And here's Boaz with a wheelchair that was lended to us from one of our research beta sites, and so we can see how the instrument feels on our lap. The instrument has guitar strap buttons that connect to standard guitar strap and prevents the instrument from falling from your lap. You could also play standing up. And we also created an accessory that helps attach and stabilize the instrument to a desk or tray to keep it from moving around. We work with users who have involuntary movement, and the instrument sometimes gets thrown around unintentionally. The function buttons of the instrument are big and comfortable for usage, just like elevator buttons. So you can press them with your thumb or with your elbow, and the spacing between them is such so you won't press neighboring buttons by mistake. And the symbols and graphics are big and clear. The black and white design is intentional for high contrast, making it easier for people with visual impairment to see which button is pressed and see which string is being strummed and where the controls are. The instrument is very durable. The outer shell is made out of a compressed ABS plastic, and we vacuum formed it on a mold, and it has an outer acrylic layer which gives the instrument its gloss and protects it from scratches. We did drop testing of the instrument from over a meter in different angles to make sure it doesn't break, parts don't fall off, and internal mechanics and electronics keep on working. So it's very robust. And you'll feel it when you play with it during the event. The strum stick has various detents or stops in its axis. So when you're strumming, you can actually feel strings. The strum tension and sensitivity can be adjusted with a knob on the bottom of the instrument. So you can set it to a very soft strumming setting like a harp, or you can tighten it up, which may be better for people with involuntary movement to control the position of the strum stick. We also have people playing with their foot, so in this case we would tighten it up and make it more controllable for these musicians. The keypad has 5 keys with a different combination of these presses. You can access many chords that you want to play. You can play any song, and you can pivot this keypad to different angles to accommodate different hand positions, or turn it 180 degrees to enable left-handed and right-handed playing. So you can switch the instrument around, and the strings change the order of the guitar strings, and you can play either right-handed or left-handed. The strum stick handle that comes with the instrument is the width of a therapeutic tennis ball. And additionally, we created 4 different handles that can be installed to cover a wide variety of abilities. Some of these handles have Velcro straps for individuals who cannot grasp the handle. And we also provide 3D drawings that people can use to print their own design for specific requirements. We actually have schools who have a 3D print lab, and they create specific handles for students who need it. There's an option to swap the small keys with a bigger key configuration that people can play with their elbow or fist. And it can also be used to turn the instrument into a beginner instrument with less chords and notes, but you could still play countless songs. It's also appropriate for people with cognitive or learning disabilities that require a simpler instrument. We created an e-box, we call it. It's an expansion box with standard mini jacks that support standard assistive technology switches that many people with disabilities already have in their environment, either to control their wheelchair or to control other devices. So when we work with these students, we disconnect their switches from the wheelchair, and plug them directly to the e-box. And this copies the functionality of the keys and the strum sticks. So we have people playing with their hands, their feet, their head, the chin. And the e-box also supports Logitech's adaptive gaming kit for the Xbox and Sony PlayStation. And we really like this kit. It's affordable and has a wide variety of switches and sensors. And for people who can't strum with the strum stick, we created the Air Strum, which is an infrared proximity sensor that plugs into the e-box and simulates strumming of strings. So you could put the sensor on the side of your head and move your head to create strumming. Or you could put it under your foot and strum that way. So anywhere there is motion, you could use the Air Strum to simulate a strumming action. Here's a cool video created by a user from Belgium playing the strum with external accessories connected to the e-box.
Okay, let's try.
We developed an accessible music method, making the strum easy to teach and easy to learn. There are color coding and number coding of the keys, which teachers they use the number coding with working with visually impaired students. So, for example, a teacher can say D minor 2 and 3. And this is an example of these are triad chords, just a few chords of many that you can play with the strum. And the top row are the 7 chords of the key of C major. And these chords can be played with one finger. And for chords that require 2 fingers on the neighboring keys, we designed it in such a way that you can press both keys with one finger. So you can play countless songs in the key of C major with one finger. And if a song is not in C major key, you can always transpose a song to the C major to make the song more accessible for people who need it. This is an example of sheet music for Let It Be with the original chords. And as you can see, music is simple, even for these great songs, but the instruments are hard to play. So we created an instrument that you can play without the blisters on your fingers and without having to work months on end to get the fingers at the exact position on the strings. There's many chords that you can play in different mode settings of the instrument. As you progress and practice, there's a pathway to mastery that you can reach with the instrument. You can also play notes and melodies with the strum. So that's it's a kind of a different playing method. You don't strum the strings. You select a string and work with your with the keys like a piano. So there are fixed scales for beginners and improvising and jamming. You can select a variety of scales, or you could switch the instrument to advanced scale and access a chromatic 2.5 octaves, a full range. So each key on the keypad represents a fret. So you have the first 5 frets of a guitar, and with 6 strings you can reach 30 semitones, so 2.5 octaves. And if you're a guitar player, you know these boxes and shapes within the first 5 frets, and you could immediately convert your playing methods to playing that the same way on a guitar, solos and melodies. We created a few tools for teachers and students. And for creating sheet music, we created a web-based song editor that you can select musical symbols, chords, melodies. You could select the text for labels, instructions, titles, and then you simply press on chords and throw them into the canvas, and then you can drag and drop these around just like any graphic editor. And this is all web-based, so no installation needed. And you can edit the text, create the song titles, for example, and then add lyrics or instructions for the student. And these songs can be printed and saved. You could also project them on a big screen. We have teachers, before we had this tool, teachers had to use Word or other editors to create these sheet music. Some of them printed and cut them out and glued them to magnets to glue them on whiteboards. So this tool really gave them an easy way to create sheet music and share them among their students and save them. So you could change the size of the objects and set the layout best to fit your student in the song. And there's also a built-in synthesizer, a web MIDI synthesizer. So if I connect my Arcana Strum, I can choose between a guitar, flute, cello, and piano, and this will play in the browser in your computer with no installation needed. And you could test out the song and see that it plays okay. We're also working now with Horn and Midiable in creating a remote music lesson platform. So this is like Zoom, but for music. There's also a built-in MIDI synthesizer within the video chat experience. And when a teacher connects his Arcana Strum, it appears on the screen with a full animation of what's going on with the instrument. And the student connects his instrument and sees his instrument as well. And so a teacher can demonstrate how to play a song, and the student can try to follow along, and the teacher sees exactly what's going on with the student's strum. So you don't have to fuss around with moving your camera and showing the teacher what you're doing, or the teacher showing you how you should play. So it's a very, very cool platform with MIDI embedded, and we think it's a game changer for remote learning. And it's also, many of our students are not as mobile as regular children learning music. So they can't just hop on a bus or their bicycle and go to the music school. They have a lot of hours at home, and this platform bridges the gap for remote learning. And before we go, I'd like to share an email sent by a teacher, Mike Whitlock from Victoria School in Birmingham, with his experience with the Arcana Strum.
Hello, Richard and Haim. Thought you would like to see the first day of us trying the Arcana here at Victoria School. It's gone down very well indeed, so much so that we are using it in our orchestra for Hit the Road Jack. The student in the video is 16 and has muscular dystrophy. His condition means he is very weak and has little to no movement in his arms, and normally plays thumb jam on the iPad, until today. By using the adjustable tension on the joystick, he was able to play all 4 chords in the piece using both hands simultaneously. This was a first for this student, and he was delighted. He felt like a real musician and a key member in the band. For me, this was a tearful moment, to see this student playing alongside his bandmates with total independence and creative freedom with the biggest smile on his face. It was something I'll never forget. Well done, Arcana.
And here's the video that Mike sent. Thank you for your attention, everybody.
So if I could welcome all the panelists back to the stage at this point for Q&A, that would be awesome. Thank you very much. So just the first one, while we're getting settled, Haim, probably for you. Arcana Strum, awesome thing. We've got one here, actually. I'll just hold it up.
Tim,
I think
Tim,
if you want to have a play,
thank you.
I believe this is going to be at the MIDI Association table in the main trade show. So do have a go. I don't think we're going to have time in this session, unfortunately, but do have a play. Haim, I was wondering, compared to the product that you originally envisioned, because you're opening up access to guitar effectively, what has surprised you about how people have used it so far? I know it's still a very young product, but is there any use cases that have really kind of shocked you and kind of went beyond what you originally thought?
Yeah, there's actually, so first of all, it's being used in many rehabilitation and therapy environments that we didn't expect it at the beginning. So occupational therapy, rehabilitation, and so music is very uplifting and a motivating activity. And occupational therapists use some of our instruments and accessories to challenge patients into moving different parts, working on finger separation, hand-eye coordination, people recovering from stroke. So this was very not expected. And another instance that really blew our minds is a autistic child that had a video game that he used to move characters around in the video, and he somehow figured out by himself that Arcana sends a specific MIDI commands, and he saw it starting to move his characters. So he used the Strum as a gaming controller, and he found out the notes by himself, and blew our minds.
I mean, that's cool. I mean, that's such an example of what we're talking about, right? You can design for one particular community, but actually opens up access to such a wider range of people. And yeah, just great to see that already, even though it's a very new product, you're already seeing those examples of things that are kind of totally outside of what you originally envisioned. So I'm just going to move us on to our panel Q&A. Elizabeth, I task you with looking at the Zoom and the Discord. Are there any real kind of key themes coming out in the questions that we could pick up on?
So we have a lot of specific questions for different instruments. So there's a few questions about the Move, and there's also a few questions about the Strum. Which one would you like to start with, the Strum or the Move?
Let's go back to the Move.
Move. So the first one, which is from Zoom, is a question about, can you have the voiceover routed to a separate output so that it doesn't come through the main mix?
Yeah, so the voiceover is actually coming from whatever device you've got voiceover enabled on. So that will be a separate laptop or tablet. It's not actually coming from the Move output. So the two aren't mixed. And here it might have seemed that way because we have both the laptop presenting and the Move plugged into the same sound mix here.
And then the second one was specifically for you, AD. Can you speak a bit on what the technical challenges are that prevent TTS happening on the Move?
So that's actually to do with the chip that's inside and the OS system that's on the chip. And I have proposed various solutions, and I think we have one promising one. But if you have ideas for these kind of limited things, write to me. I would love to know what you might suggest, because it's one of those things when you, I think it was mentioned by Haim as well, is when you go into production with something like this, you have to really commit to the hardware choices and the chips, everything. And it's not very easy to change them once the process is going. And so, you know, for its faults or its successes, you kind of have to accept it as it is. And because we weren't involved before it got past that physicality stage, we weren't able to really think of the way to change that without changing the process. And the changing the process is kind of a much bigger challenge than we anticipated.
Cool. So if we take a quick question about the Arcana Strum, and then we'll focus on questions that kind of everyone can speak to, if that's okay, more general ones.
Well, I've just noticed that Haim's very good at replying in the Discord himself.
Okay.
So maybe I don't need to ask them.
Well, in that case, shall we move on to maybe some of the themes that we didn't have time for in your section, Tim? Because they are going to be relevant for everyone, because they just are. And I think a big one was the language and the taxonomy of terms and then things like that. Talking about disability and access requirements and access information. Building up that kind of lexicon, really. And
So I mean, it's something that we're thinking very actively about at the moment, because we're building a collection of accessible instruments and accessible tech. And so one of the big unsolved problems is, how on earth do we describe this stuff in a way that's searchable and findable in general? There's lots of different ways to do it. And then as we go along, we need to eventually establish standards. Everybody needs to understand when we use a particular technical term, everybody needs to understand what that means, how that applies to their particular context. And so I'm working with AD on this in particular. So AD, why don't you talk a bit more about details?
So what we've I was doing a PhD in accessible digital musical instruments, and I spent the best part of 7 years trying to figure out the answer to this question. So it's not without its challenges. But what people have talked about a lot in the past is standards. Standards will help us. We need our own music standards. And then we've realized, actually looking at standards doesn't always help people for where you're at in your development cycle, or like the knowledge that you have. And it's actually really hard to look at accessibility standards if you're not used to them. And we actually thought one of the things that we're missing right now is an understanding of, when we say this about a product, it means X, Y, Z. Like, there isn't that. So when we say high contrast, is there a specific threshold for a color contrast that has to meet? It's kind of could be subjectively interpreted. Some people choose to just make something really harsh opposites, but then we learned earlier that can be really problematic for some people to just have that one option. So we've been working on collecting terms that could be used as labels on products, that instead of our big standards that you have to dive through and read through, You can have a label like high contrast. You can have a description of what we mean by it. You can have an instruction to developers as to what they have to do to meet that. And only when they meet that can they apply that label high contrast on their product website. And then for the person who's buying the instrument or reviewing the instrument or collecting it from AMEC even, can say, oh, I could filter by something with high contrast, or I could filter with something with, one-handed operation, or I can filter for something that can be, many things, uses a screen reader, works with this adaptive technology and assistive technology. And we can really explicitly say these single words or small terms, what they mean, and then have a label applied to a piece of equipment. So people can actually go, hey, this ticks off all the boxes for what I need. And developers can have a better understanding of the standard that they have to meet to make that accessible without having to dive through all of these other really obscure standards that could be applied or couldn't be applied to your situation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I think just having that shared language is a really important thing. At the moment, if you look at the way instruments are categorized and taxonomized, it's like woodwind, strings, brass, and percussion, which is incredibly unhelpful way of understanding musical instruments in this kind of context, because often you're dealing with MIDI controllers and it can make any kind of sound it wants, and the interface can be almost anything and enormously varied to produce the same musical output. And so trying to understand those kinds of issues to enable people to be able to find what they need in amongst all of the different options is incredibly difficult. And so trying to nail down some of these basic, these really core terms is going to be really central to enabling that.
And it also does the thing of where we were talking before about the social and the medical model of disability. Instead of focusing necessarily on this person needs this and we're going to create this unique thing for this person's specific needs, we're looking at these instruments offer these features, and these features work for these groups of people. But it doesn't necessarily focus on the individual, it focuses on the features of accessible music technology or not so accessible music technology as it might happen. So that's what we're trying to take the attention towards.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And Tim, were there any particular themes that you wanted to pick up on earlier that we haven't had time for?
No, I mean, I think that the main thing really, I mean, we've covered a lot of the ground. I think the main thing is the goal in all of this work that we're doing is to make this ordinary, to make this standard, to make this something that's just available as absolutely a default everywhere you go in every single context. And the more that we can do this kind of work and the more that we can make that happen, that's where we need to be. And so, all of the effort that we're doing is, I think, ultimately needs to be towards that goal as far as possible. And one of the things that we can do about that is to just share as much as possible. Share the information that you have, share your product information, really go out there, find the people, talk to the community, as everybody said, really. And, that's the key to really moving forward, I think.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, you spoke earlier about the big question of why. And I think one question you should all go away with today is, why not? Why aren't you doing it in your products and projects and things? Why not? And then, you've seen the reasons why today, but really I think we need to start the dialogue now as why not?
I'm stealing that for my next presentation.
Cool. So Liz, anything else in the Zoom or the Discord, or should we take a question?
So my Zoom iPad has unfortunately died. So if there are any more on Zoom, I can't see them. But I'm sure there might be some.
Yeah, if we could grab a charger from volunteer, that'd be awesome.
I'm gonna do the running. So you got over here, or Trey? Let's bring it to you, Trey.
Hi, AD. Thank you very much. I have a direct question for you, actually. What was the most brain-melting challenge you faced in getting Ableton Live to become accessible, and how did you overcome it?
Brain melting is a great word.
Brain melting. Can I say everything? It's really hard, actually. But, God, I can't pick one thing. It's probably that you're focusing on what people need from different parts of the UI. And live for sighted users is a very busy space. One of the design features of it is to have everything you need available to view all at one time. And I actually think we've talked about this a lot, is that there's a lot of glanceability when it comes to doors, that you can just glance at the screen and know what's enabled, what's soloed, what's this, what's that, because of all that information being presented to you. And this is just a thing that has not been reported or done for any screen reader user very well on any of the current doors that are out there. There's examples of where it's done a little bit better and a little bit worse, but we're still working on this. So it became a topic of discussion, and then we were like, oh, this needs a whole like research day or week or year. It's really big. And I hope that maybe we can crack it one day. But, something in the works, timeline, couple of months, get me a workshop and we'll try and tackle it. Who was also there to ask?
Hi. First, thanks for the presentation. It's been really, really excellent and a lot of good information. I was wondering how, if at all, you can account for learning and the potential for virtuosity inside of the design process. And what I mean is like nobody would make a violin and say, oh, that's a good UI, but yet people are able to learn it. And you Andre commented you can now play the move blind because the technology helped you learn it. So how does that trajectory play into designing accessibility features?
Who would like to take that?
Yeah,
Tim, how does that work? I guess from the bespoke end of things,
Yeah.
how does that influence stuff?
Yeah, so I suppose that what's important is that you have something at each point along the route, and something's available. But by the time, often there's a lot of stuff that's out there for kind of workshopping and beginners educational kind of contexts, and then it's really possible to build, if you have the resources, to build a bespoke solution for somebody. And there tends to be an enormous gap in between where it might be actually realistic that someone might spend £10,000 on an instrument if they're a professional musician, 10 or even 20,000, a significant amount of money. The kind of money that you would need to build a bespoke instrument is tractable in that, it's a doable kind of thing and not totally unrealistic. But the problem is the gap between those two things, and that actually is a really massive challenge at the moment. How do you get from that kind of early stage musicianship through to the kind of really high level bespoke development? And it's kind of an unsolved problem, because as soon as you move out of anything that's provided a standard and you need something bespoke, it becomes expensive to develop. And so that's a kind of intrinsic problem at the moment that I don't know is necessarily solved.
Yeah, and I guess that's something, Haim, you spoke about a little bit, is scaling this kind of thing, something that started off as a bespoke solution, but scaling it into a product that is more widely available. Did you want to speak any more about that, the process of taking a product to market? I know you covered quite a lot of it already, but any updates there?
I think it's exactly what Tim just mentioned. It's very challenging to take something to take it to production. You got to invest in tooling, and at first you can't commit to these large amounts of units that you can sell. So you work with technology that's more expensive to create. You got the assembly requires more skills, and unfortunately the instrument is expensive, and it sometimes defeats the mission of making it accessible. There's one of Tim's pyramid bullets there in the 5 A's. So we started on that note, reaching out to institutions and organizations that do have a budget for these kinds of instruments, because it's not a solution for just a single person. It can be used for the entire class or the entire school, and it makes more sense business-wise and budget-wise to invest in that kind of instrument in that environment. And I'm very happy to say that the UK government and Department for Education has £25 million funding for improving music instruments throughout UK schools. And accessibility solutions are part of that budget. So hoping that price will not be a barrier for schools to adopt these kinds of inclusive solutions and let children with special needs also enjoy the benefits of music education that I think most of us took for granted. But many children are systemically excluded from this basic activity of learning music. So hopefully the new government funds will help schools create these inclusive and accessible music programs, just like with the Composer, the Digit Composer, which is a very cool music instrument. So, and there are many other solutions out there. So I'm hoping that schools will really create these accessible music programs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any more questions in the room?
Yes, we had another one.
Hello all. Thank you very much. It's been a great panel with great contributions. I was just thinking about some of the remarks that were put forward about starting inclusively, for instance, which is, I think it's quite intuitive, quite obvious. So it kind of like begs the question of why don't companies start designing with accessibility in mind, right? And I was just like trying like to think as almost like a thought exercise, trying to put myself on a product manager shoes, like for one of those big companies. And I was thinking about how do they deal with, like trade-offs that happen between customizability or building options, which oppose affordability, for instance, right? Or if you're working hardware, you're dealing with smaller margins, so not as with software. And so you have to make all these trade-offs. And so I was just like trying to understand how this goes, how people think about these things, and how they traverse or fight these hurdles to reach like a balance and have like a product that kind of meets all of these requirements in this space.
Yeah, Eddie, you're probably the best person to speak to that. But some of it is, I guess some companies will just be stuck in tradition and in release cycles and just doing what they've done if they don't take time to specifically think about their development cycles and how accessible the products they're making are. Like sometimes it's just that. It's maybe they need a bit more awareness and education and need to take just a little bit of time to think about how they might change their strategy to be more inclusive. Something Ableton has done.
Yeah, so I think there's a good quote here. There's like the most damaging phrase in the language is we've always done it that way. And bringing accessibility as a foundational thinking is going against that. And, it is going against the we've always done it this way. And I think for me, the most unlocking thing in this challenge, because it still sits as a challenge in places in Ableton, I'm not going to say that we don't have this pushback sometimes of like, but is it worth it? It's going to be too much. There's going to be too much time sunk into this. It's going to be too big. Is actually just to start by demonstrating it. And honestly, Note was one of the biggest success stories for me internally, because going from 0 to playable in 4 months with very little distraction from, there was very little for us to actually take time and do research. And actually the developers were surprised at how much they could achieve and how quickly it all turned around. And it's because of that success story that people have been like, right, get involved in this project and this project and this project. And we really need to think about this now. Like there's been so much more buy-in because when you demonstrate that it actually can be done very quickly with the right support. And it can be done without interrupting your development cycles, without changing what people are doing on sprints too much, without, and gives people new skills at the same time. Like the people who have started doing accessibility work now have a whole subset on their developer skill list that they can say, I can also do accessibility work. And that gives them a second set of skills that makes them more employable in general. And, this is a really big thing to just show people how much it can give to them in that process.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm afraid we've actually run out of time. That's probably a good point to end it because that is a point that everyone can push on from. I'm aware there are still questions in the Zoom chat that we've not been able to get to, in the Discord as well, and in the room as well. We had some hands left, so please do continue the conversation on Discord. And I want to make sure we can dig up those Zoom questions as well and get those. We'll deal with them in Discord if that's okay. Just one thing to address as well. While we did have the Zoom Q&A up, I noticed a comment that actually accessing the Zoom link for this session wasn't as accessible as it could have been, perhaps. So just wanted to kind of hold hands up a little bit and say, yeah, that should have been better. Yeah, just to say that really. But aside from that, I think it's been a really, really great session. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for ADC for making the space for this, and to ADC sponsors. I know the diversity scholarships have been really helpful in creating the kind of critical mass to make this session a success. And also the bit of additional support we had from the MIDI Association as well. That's really, really appreciated. So thank you all for your time.